All right, ready to go deep. Let's dive into this Sunny Side Up newsletter.
Yeah, this one's packed. Financial news, history, and money tips all rolled into one.
Definitely a lot to unpack. Well, let's start with leap years.
Leap years.
Yeah, that extra day we get every 4 years.
Right.
Ever stop to think about why we even need them?
It's all about keeping our calendars in sync, right?
Yeah, I always just kind of took it for granted.
Well, our calendars say a year's 365 days, but the Earth actually takes a bit longer to orbit the sun.
Oh, so it's not exactly 365.
Nope, it's more like 355.2422 days.
Wow, so that extra quarter of a day, that really matters.
It does, over time. If we didn't account for it, our calendar would drift out of sync with the seasons.
Imagine celebrating Christmas in summer.
Exactly. That's why we have leap years, to adjust for that discrepancy.
The newsletter actually mentioned that Julius Caesar was the one who implemented the leap year system.
Yeah, way back in 46 BCE.
Whoa, that's a long time ago.
He realized that rounding down to 365 days was messing things up. So he came up with a solution, adding an extra day to February every 4 years.
Pretty clever for the time, I guess.
It was. But even leap years, they weren't perfect.
What do you mean?
Well, rounding up those extra hours still added a tiny bit of time each year.
Huh. So what happened then?
Well, that's where the Gregorian calendar comes in. And the century rule.
Oh, yeah, the century rule?
So years divisible by 4 are leap years,
Yeah.
unless they're century years, like 1800, 1900.
Okay, so those are different.
Those have to be divisible by 400 to be leap years. It's all about fine-tuning to match the Earth's orbit.
So that's why 2000 was a leap year, but 1900 wasn't.
Exactly.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. The system we use, it's the result of centuries of adjustments.
And it makes you think, what other systems do we have that might need tweaking as we learn more?
That's a great point. Okay, let's move on to something a little more modern day.
What's that?
Shrinkflation.
Ah, yes, shrinkflation.
When companies shrink product sizes instead of raising prices.
Sneaky, isn't it?
Totally. Feels a bit like a trick.
Well, it is a way for companies to deal with rising costs,
Yeah. But still, you're paying the same price for less product.
Right, and the newsletter called out PepsiCo specifically.
And they even got into it with a French grocery chain, right?
Careful. Yeah. They actually banned all PepsiCo products from their shelves.
Wow. That's pretty drastic.
It is. It's a bold statement. It kind of makes you wonder about their motives.
Yeah, are they trying to protect consumers?
Maybe? Or could it be a way to put pressure on PepsiCo?
Or maybe a bit of both.
Possibly.
The newsletter actually suggested that companies would be better off just slowly raising prices.
Interesting.
Instead of shrinking products, What do you think?
It's a question of psychology, I think. How do consumers react to price changes?
Right. Are we more tolerant of small increases over time?
Or do we feel betrayed when we get less product for the same price?
It's tough. I guess it depends on the product and the brand, too.
You're right. Brand loyalty is a big factor. If you trust a brand.
You might be okay with a price increase, I guess.
But if you feel tricked, like with shrinkflation, you might switch brands.
Makes sense. All right, for our last topic, let's jump into the digital world. Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Always a hot topic.
Well, the newsletter focused on this idea that there's a finite supply of Bitcoin.
Only 21 million can ever be mined.
Right, and that got me thinking, what happens when it's all mined out?
Is there a last Bitcoin?
Exactly. It's kind of wild to think about.
Well, the whole concept of Bitcoin mining is pretty complex.
Yeah, it involves powerful computers solving these crazy math problems to verify transactions.
Right, and the reward for mining a Bitcoin block gets cut in half every 4 years.
I remember reading about that, halving.
Yep, it started at 50 Bitcoins, then went to 25, then 12.5, and it keeps going down.
So it gets less profitable over time.
Yeah, and eventually it might not even be worth it to mine new Bitcoins.
So theoretically, we might never actually reach 21 million.
It's possible. It's like a digital gold rush. But eventually the gold runs out.
That's a great analogy, but then what? What happens to the value of Bitcoin if no one's mining it anymore?
That's the big question. Does its scarcity drive the price up even more?
Or does it become stagnant because there's no new supply?
We're really on the edge of uncharted territory here. The future of Bitcoin is full of possibilities.
Definitely a lot to think about. And I think that's a great place to wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into Sunny Side Up.
Yeah, definitely some food for thought.
We've gone from ancient calendars to supermarkets to the digital world of Bitcoin. It's amazing how these seemingly different things connect, isn't it?
It is, and it just shows you there's always more to learn.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll keep exploring the insights from Sunny Side Up.
We'll delve even deeper into these topics and see what other connections we can find.
Can't wait.
Me neither. Back again for more Sunny Side Up.
You know, we were talking about shrinkflation earlier.
Yeah, shrinking products, keeping prices the same.
Yeah. Right, and there was that whole thing with PepsiCo and Carrefour.
Yeah, Carrefour, that French grocery chain.
They actually banned all PepsiCo products, remember?
Pretty bold move.
They called them out for shrinkflation, basically.
It was a big story, that's for sure.
What do you think was behind that decision, though, really?
Well, it kind of looks like, the little guy fighting the big corporation.
Right, like they're standing up for the consumer.
Yeah, that's the image they're putting out there.
But could it also be, like, a business strategy?
Oh, definitely. Think about all the publicity they got.
Good point. Suddenly everyone's talking about Carrefour.
And they're seen as, like, the champions of fair pricing.
So it's good for their image.
Exactly. They're tapping into this consumer awareness.
People are getting wise to these tactics.
They are. And companies can't ignore that anymore.
One bad headline can really hurt.
Absolutely. It's all about reputation these days.
The newsletter had an interesting suggestion, though.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
What if companies just raised prices slowly instead of shrinking things?
Instead of shrinkflation, just be upfront about it.
Yeah, gradual price increases. Would that work?
It's hard to say. It really depends on how people perceive value.
Do we notice small increases over time? Or do we just get mad when things get smaller?
Right. It's a psychological thing.
I guess brand loyalty matters too, doesn't it?
Huge factor. If you really like a brand.
You might be okay with paying a little more, maybe?
But if you feel like a company's being sneaky.
That trust is broken.
Exactly. Companies have a tough balancing act.
Keep costs down, keep customers happy. It's tricky.
It really is. Okay, let's switch gears a bit.
Yeah, let's talk about something a little more personal.
Personal finance.
You got it. The newsletter had these cool money tips.
I love a good money tip.
This one was about rounding up your spending.
Rounding up, what's that?
So let's say you budget $50 for groceries.
Okay.
And you only spend $47.25.
Right.
You round up to $50 and put that extra $2.75 into savings.
Ah, I see. So you're basically saving the difference.
Exactly. It's like finding hidden money in your budget.
I like it. It's painless. You don't even notice it.
Right. But over time, it adds up.
Micro savings. It's a powerful thing.
It's like a little bonus every time you come in under budget.
And it reinforces good habits.
Exactly. Spending less, saving more, it all adds up.
Sunny Side Up always has these great practical tips.
They make it easy to understand, even for beginners.
It's all about empowering people, right?
Giving them the tools to take control of their finances.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Leap years, shrinkflation, Bitcoin, and even some money tips.
What stands out to you the most?
I think it's the connections, How seemingly unrelated things are actually linked.
That's the beauty of it, right? Seeing the bigger picture.
It's all connected, these systems and cycles.
And the more we understand them, the better decisions we can make.
Exactly. Let's take a quick pause here, gather our thoughts.
That sounds good. We'll be back soon to wrap things up.
All right, back for the final round of Sunny Side Up Insights.
Ready to wrap things up.
Absolutely. Thinking about everything we've discussed today, it really highlights how much our lives are shaped by systems.
Systems, yeah. Whether it's something as ancient as a calendar or as modern as cryptocurrency.
It's fascinating how these systems work and how they're constantly evolving.
And sometimes those systems have limits, right?
Like we talked about with Bitcoin mining.
Yes. Eventually, mining new Bitcoin might not even be profitable.
So what happens then to the whole system?
That's the million-dollar question. Some people believe that Bitcoin's value will just keep going up.
Because it's scarce.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Limited supply, high demand.
But others argue that it could stifle innovation, if there's no incentive to mine new Bitcoin.
Like a closed loop, right?
Yeah.
Where does the growth come from?
It's a really interesting debate. It makes you think about the long-term viability of the whole thing.
It does. And it reminds us that even in the digital world, there are constraints.
Speaking of constraints, I remember that section in the newsletter about human perception.
Oh, right. How our brains are wired to focus on the immediate.
Yeah, like instant gratification.
Makes sense from an evolutionary perspective.
Right, back when we had to worry about immediate threats.
But it can trip us up in the modern world.
Totally. We buy things we don't need or we don't save enough.
Because we're not thinking long term.
So how do we overcome that?
Well, the newsletter had some good tips. Setting financial goals.
Creating a budget, automating savings.
All those practical things.
It's like we have to train our brains to think differently.
Exactly, to focus on the bigger picture.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into Sunny Side Up.
It's been a good one. Lots of interesting topics.
We've covered everything from ancient calendars to modern supermarkets to the future of cryptocurrency.
And we even got some practical money tips along the way.
It's amazing how these seemingly random things connect, isn't it?
It is. And it just goes to show learning is a lifelong journey.
There's always something new to discover, something to make you think.
And that's what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and always, always keep that sunny side up. Thanks for joining us.